When Unai Emery first took charge of Aston Villa were a club that were bereft of confidence, no structure, and didn't know what direction to go in. Steven Gerrard was sacked after an abysmal performance as Aston Villa manager, leaving them 17th in the league. Since Unai Emery's arrival, he can do no wrong at Aston Villa, taking them from 17th in the relegation place all the way to the Champions League. Last season, Unai Emery could do no wrong at Aston Villa, bringing that feel-good vibe back to the stadium, whilst averaging 3.39 goal-creating actions per 90 in 129 goal-creating actions across the whole season, putting them 5th out the entire Premier League season. But after a very respectable start to this season, only losing one game in their opening 13 fixtures, and that included an unbelievable win at Villa Park, beating the mighty Bayern Munich, including wins against Young Boys and Bologna in the Champions League. But since that win against Bologna in the Champions League, things have taken a turn for the worse. They haven't won in the last 8 fixtures, and that includes 4 losses, 3 draws, and now Aston Villa fans are starting to be concerned. Aston Villa find themselves in a similar situation to Newcastle United last season, surprisingly qualifying for the Champions League, but this season has had its worries, and the metrics speak for themselves. They're conceding more goals, they're conceding more shots per 90, they have less attempts themselves, the less possession per 90, and they're averaging less passes per 90. Now, before we get into it, it's clear to understand that Unai Emery has done a wonderful job at Aston Villa, often punching above his weight considering the PSR rules and where he picked them up from. It has been unbelievable, but that doesn't mean that he's not subject to any constructive criticism. Now, there are many reasons why Aston Villa might not be able to sustain this level of success and eventually have a blip. PSR rules being one of them, unfortunately, due to the shocking rules in place, it prevents clubs like Aston Villa being ambitious. Injuries being another. Look at Amadou Onana, or should I say Andre Onana. Players dipping in and out of form because that's natural, but also Unai Emery needs to take a look at himself for picking the wrong profiles to fit his system. Let's get into it. Now, one of my favourite things about Aston Villa last season wasn't them in possession, wasn't how direct they were. It was their ability to control games out of possession. Unai Emery likes his teams to defend in a 4-4-2 structure, sometimes a 4-4-1-1. And his structure he implements is so good, it just allows no space for the opposition to operate. The midfielders will tuck in, they'll congest the space, and they'll leave no gaps in between their lines. So they'll push up their defence so high they're almost on top of their midfielders. And this meant they were incredibly difficult to break down, but they were so intelligent, and communication was a key part of this. Aston Villa became kings of catching people offside. They finished top last season with the most successful offside traps with 106. This is almost double than Tottenham Hotspur, who finished second. Now, the beauty about this is Aston Villa weren't a pressing team, and they aren't a man-to-man marking team either. They're a team that marks space and leaves no stone unturned when it comes to leaving gaps in their structure. Now, because they didn't press and break their shape, the opposition found it difficult to break them down. Aston Villa didn't need to be a high dueling team. In fact, they ranked second bottom for tackles won last season. Now, on the flip side of that, in possession, Aston Villa were a dream to watch. They were so direct. In fact, they were one of the most counter-attacking teams in the Premier League last season. Unai Emery created a tactic that was so good at unbalancing the opposition that didn't know how to cope. And then, speaking of unbalancing, you had John McGinn coming inside, forming a box shape in the middle, while the other winger supported Ollie Watkins in attack. Now, what Aston Villa was so good at, playing in congested areas before bang, they had 4 or 5 players breaking through into space. And once they hit the final third, that's when they'd be extremely direct. And opponents just didn't know how to cope with it. Now, Douglas Luiz has been a key component of that because he gives them that stability, that control in possession. And I feel like Amadou Onana has slightly brought that in. And I'm going to touch upon Amadou Onana very shortly. So it won't surprise you to hear that Aston Villa have had the most counter-attacking threats on the break. They're a team that look for quick routes to goal, emphasis on wide channels and inside channels. But they've also got powerful ball carriers such as Jacob Ramsey last season and Moussa Diaby, and their ball carrying mainly come in central areas or just slightly in the inside channels. This allowed Lucas Digne to get high and wide and being an extra attacking option. So it's no surprise that Villa found the back of the net so often last season. So if you look at this heat map from Aston Villa last season, the blue areas contest of where Aston Villa had the majority of the ball. The red areas are where the opposition had most of the ball, and the silver or grey areas are where it's fairly even. So as you can see, Lucas Digne was key going forward. A lot came down that left-hand side for Aston Villa. Now, I often say profiles make partnerships which complete a team. Konsa played the majority of his games at right back last season, and what was good about Aston Villa in possession is Konsa tucked into a back three just to provide extra security in transition moments. Now, if you look at Aston Villa's average positioning to last season to this season, it's a lot deeper. Therefore, they're leaving more room for the opposition to exploit. Aston Villa aren't a team that suffocate opponents through pressing, but they suffocate opponents by just not allowing them any room to get out. So intensity isn't the factor of why Aston Villa are conceding so many shots. It's more to do with profiles and positioning. Now, I don't want to pick on Matty Cash because this is not his fault, but since he's come back into the side, we've seen Aston Villa be exploited. Now, what I mean by this is Konsa was very good at tucking into a back three, providing more security to the back line when they're in possession. So if there ever was a turnover, they're very comfortable in transition moments. Whereas Matty Cash doesn't have the profile to do that. And as you can see from his heat map, it's very different to Konsa's. So the formation and what Unai Emery's implementing hasn't changed. The system inside that formation has changed because he's now got two traditional fullbacks rather than one centre-back playing at full-back and allowing Lucas Digne to bomb on, but still having the cover at the back. So without that third centre-back tucking in, it's exposing both Aston Villa's centre-backs. Now they're forced to go engage out of sheer panic mode, and that's why Aston Villa's tackles went up this season. You may think that's a good thing, but in an Unai Emery system, it's actually not. So you can see the average positioning's massively decreased in Aston Villa this season. They've almost went from a high line to a low block. And this, like I touched on earlier, is just leaving more gaps between the lines of four. That's just giving the opposition more room to find pockets of space, which is exactly what we're seeing at Chelsea on the weekend. So how do you fix this problem? It's about picking the right fullback profiles to play with each other. Although they're on the opposite ends of the pitch, it still impacts the team structure. Now, if you're going to play Matty Cash at right back, I would introduce Ian Matson to come in because he is comfortable in central areas. If you look at his heat map while he was at Borussia Dortmund over the whole season, in comparison to Lucas Digne's, you can see the difference in their profiles. And if you want to play Lucas Digne and continue his ability to provide width for Aston Villa, you've got to start Konsa at right back. Because since Aston Villa have brought in Matty Cash and Lucas Digne, they're getting caught out too many times. This is strikingly similar to Newcastle United from last season to this season. And Newcastle United have also been in bad form. Last season, they had Dan Burn acting as that third centre-back and allowed Kieran Trippier to bomb on. That's very similar to what Aston Villa did last season with Lucas Digne and Konsa. But now this season, Newcastle have changed to a more traditional fullbacks, just like Aston Villa since Matty Cash has come into the side. Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall both like to get forward, and that's leaving Newcastle United vulnerable at the back. And playing with that high line didn't quite worry Unai Emery because Emi Martinez actually finished with the most sweeping actions out of any keeper in the Premier League last season with 28. So if the opposition did manage to break the offside trap, Martinez was always there to sweep things up. And that is why Aston Villa faced the third fewest shots from open play last season, only behind Manchester City and Arsenal. Now, another thing that has taken away any defensive stability from Aston Villa is Amadou Onana's injury. Despite missing the last 8 games, he's still sitting highest for tackles per 90 and interceptions per 90. Without his presence and physicality, Aston Villa are getting overrun in the middle of the pitch. But if we're talking about last season, obviously Amadou Onana wasn't at Aston Villa, but I felt Douglas Luiz and Kamara complemented each other well. They both stayed back and structured that back four, whereas Yuri Tillemans is a lot more direct and he's not as disciplined as the other two. So last season, Aston Villa were more inclined to having 2 screen protectors in front of the back four, but this season they've been limited just to 1 since Onana's come out the side. And this again leaves more space for the opposition to attack. Now, the beauty of Aston Villa offensively last season was the speed and movement of their attack. It was simply beautiful. And I feel like that's been taken away because of the defensive structure. Aston Villa now don't have those players in position to make those third man runs, to punish opposition. What Aston Villa was so good at is creating overloads in the central areas. John McGinn would tuck in off the left-hand side, leaving space for Lucas Digne to roam into, but it also created overloads centrally, and this just ultimately provided a 4-on-3 situation. And this is what created Aston Villa's third-man run. So effectively, in transition moments, Villa's shape changed from a 4-4-2 to a 3-2-4-1. This allowed them to create a numerical advantage and attack from deep. But it all works together because they're sitting so deep in their defensive shape, it's affecting their attacking movement. Simply, players just aren't quick enough to transition from a low block into a direct attacking approach. Now, Aston Villa were able to do this comfortably last season because the backline was a lot higher up. They were suffocating the opposition, therefore they were winning the ball back higher up the pitch, so therefore they had more players near or in the attacking third to create chances. Now, the absence of Douglas Luiz is noticeable because he finished with the most progressive passes in the Aston Villa team last season. What do progressive passes do? Advance the team higher up the pitch. This allowed their two number 8s or number 10s or inside wingers, whatever you want to call them, make adventurous runs. The opposition just didn't know how to cope and they had 3 or 4 bodies running directly past them. Now, this sort of directness done 3 things. It gave the man in possession more options, it off-balanced the opposition structure, but it also supported Ollie Watkins in attack. And without these third-man runs is exactly why Aston Villa's creativity has reduced. Now, because they're playing 5 yards or 10 yards deeper, they can't be as courageous, ambitious with their runs, and that's reflected in their directness in their playing style. Last season, Aston Villa finished third for most direct attacks with 47, only behind Liverpool with 55 and Tottenham with 50. And their shot creating actions after a live pass was 17.6. That significantly reduced their season to 15.1. This just tells me that they can't be as direct because they're not making those third man runs. And this is why we're seeing Ollie Watkins so isolated. Now, the defensive structure is impacting the offensive structure, and this can be down to a couple of things. When you start conceding a couple of goals and you start losing games, naturally you're going to defend deeper. It's a natural instinct in a player, and more offensive players are going to be more cautious in their positioning, and that's just down to confidence in your own ability to defend. But I'm a firm believer that confidence comes from the manager. It's up to Unai Emery to find a solution to this and get the players to believe that if they continue to do this, the methods will work. So how would I resolve this solution? Well, I would bring Konsa back in at right back and continue to play Lucas Digne on the left. Now, since Amadou Onana is injured, what I would do is bring John McGinn back into those central areas. I'd push Morgan Rogers out wide and put Yuri Tillemans in that attacking number 10 position. But Amadou Onana's presence in that midfield is absolutely crucial. Now look, lack of form, confidence is another thing. Ollie Watkins missed 23 big chances in the Premier League last season. This season, after 13 games, he's already missed 13. Look, players come in and out of form. Ollie Watkins is no different. But I would continue with Ollie Watkins because I think once he gets one, he's going to start firing. But the one key thing I would bring back in is those third man runs. Those number 10s just getting in and around Ollie Watkins. Because at the minute, he's looking isolated. When you think about it, if Aston Villa are defending deeper, that ultimately puts Ollie Watkins 5 yards deeper. So he's not in those advanced positions to get those shots off. So I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of my analysis on Aston Villa? If you think I'm wrong, let us know in the comments below. If you think I'm quite right, again, let us know in the comments below. But again, I appreciate you all for watching. And shout out to whoever asked us to make this video because I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope you did too. And if you did, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, thank you very much.